All right, we have a very special panel now. day2 eligibility and other benefits of third country citizenship. This is a very hot topic, especially in this part of the world. And we're very honored to have some very distinguished and experienced practitioners. Our special leader, Mr. Ron Plasko, and please go ahead and introduce the rest of your panel.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Ron Plasko. To my left is Tammy Fox-Isitoff, and hopefully you've seen both of us at various seminars and around AILA. There's another face up here who you may not have met, and I'm very honored to introduce the Warren Newfield, who is Ambassador Newfield is the Consul General for Grenada to the U.S., based in Miami, and he will be talking about obtaining Grenada citizenship. And we're going to talk to you about how that ties into the day2 discussion we're going to have. Fact, if you're a wealthy person from China who wants to invest in the EB-5 program today, it will probably take 10 to 15 years to get into the US. Fact, if you're a person from Vietnam who wants to immigrate based on an investment, it will probably take 5 or more years to get into the US. Okay. If you're interested in EB-5 and you're from India, you're from Brazil, there will probably be waiting lists under the quota starting in 2018, and it will be many years before you can immigrate to the US based on EB-5. If you're interested in EB-5 from any other country with no quota backlog, with the processing time delays, it is likely to be at least about 3 years before you're going to enter the US. So we all have clients who either have money or have access to money, are interested in starting a business in the US, interested in having their kids educated in the US, and really the only way they can do it is based on investment. Well, what to do if, other than wait somewhere between 3 and 15 years to be able to immigrate? That's our panel today. And what we're talking to you about is probably the hottest subject in China right now. So, with that said, Tammy, we want to talk about the fact that it is possible, correct, to get citizenship by investment from China, Vietnam, anywhere else, as a means of getting an day2 visa to solve the problems we've talked about. So, first of all, why do people want to obtain third country citizenship? A lot of people may not be aware of how hot a topic is for your clients for various reasons to obtain third country citizenship by investment.
You know, one of the reasons people choose to get third country citizenship is the visa-free travel to many countries. And Warren, how many countries does Grenada, for example, offer visa-free travel to?
Currently, Grenada is 123 countries, but most notably are some of those countries are usual for visa-free travel to top China. There's one of the few countries in the world that's visa-free travel to China, and it's the only one that's a citizenship by investment program that is visa-free. Visa-free to Russia, which many people find very attractive. So currently 123, obviously Schengen as well, and
So, I mean, there are a lot of visa, you know, just the idea that you can travel visa-free to all these countries is an incentive to get, for example, Grenada citizenship. For safe haven, you know, I have lots of clients who are wealthy who come in from Venezuela, and they're not going to get asylum. And there isn't, right now, to get an L is like pulling teeth from USCIS. If they have a company at home that employs 50 people and now is down to 10 people or 8 people, chances of them getting an L or keeping an L are slim. So they may want to get Grenada citizenship because EB-5 processing is at between 25 and 33 months just for the 526. Some people want to get third country citizenship because of tax reasons. I have had a number of Colombians this year give up Colombian citizenship. Colombia is now a 70% tax on worldwide income. And so a lot of Colombian nationals this year are not, what's hot, what's not, Colombian nationals are giving up their citizenship in droves. Avoiding issues with the US passport. I have a lot of friends who travel frequently to the Middle East. They don't want to travel for the US passport to certain countries in the Middle East. They feel much safer traveling with an island passport, something that's going to be less likely to cause attention. Also, for somebody who visits the US frequently, who may not want those Iran or Iraq or Syrian stamps in their passport, they may want a third country passport. Avoiding issues with the US travel ban. I recently got somebody from Syria an EB-5 visa because that person had a Dominican passport. And not an EB-5, an immigrant visa through EB-5, where without the Dominican passport, I would have never been able to do so. And for somebody subject to removal proceedings. I mean, I have clients who are possibly on the verge of being ordered removed who really cannot go back to a certain country because they will be killed. And for those individuals, you know, acquisition of citizenship in a third country, forget about the E2, is very desirable. For example, St. Lucia, just pulling it, not the worst place to live, you guys, is St. Lucia, $100,000. You know, so somebody's going to be sent back to their death. Pulling a third country passport might be very useful. And one of the other last reasons for getting a third country passport, besides the E2, would be quota backlogs. Look at what's happening with India. Any day now, we're going to see a regulation stripping H4s of work permission. You know, so what is an Indian to do with maybe 10 or 12 or 15 years where their spouse can't work? Well, maybe an Indian doctor would like to get, you know, Grenada citizenship in E2, and then their spouse can work on that E2 until, you know, quota becomes current.
So we're going to the next slide. We're going to do what could be a many-hour discussion and compact it into a few minutes. So Tammy has introduced all of the reasons why people might be interested in third country citizenship by investment. Now there are, at my last count, about 10 countries around the world where you can get a passport based on investment. And we want to just, on a brief overview, kind of go through how you look at the different countries to compare which ones make sense. We're going to see that only one of them has a bilateral investment treaty with the US, and that's why Ambassador Neufeld is here from Grenada. But there are other reasons, as Tammy said, why people want citizenship. So the countries range from Malta and Cyprus to a lot of countries in the Caribbean. So, first of all, there are lots of countries where you can get residence by investment, but only about 10 where you can get citizenship immediately. Minimum investment amounts vary from about 100,000 to about 2 million. And again, it's like anything else, you get different things for what you're in effect buying. Type of investment. In some cases, you're donating money. So one-way street, you're giving the money, you're getting a passport. Nothing wrong with that, perfectly legal. In other countries, you're buying property. In other countries, it may be some sort of complicated lending arrangement. In other countries, you might be buying government bonds, et cetera, all sorts of different ways of doing it. Processing times vary greatly, from 2 or 3 months on the short side to maybe a year or more on the long side. In some countries, you have to establish a residence in order to get your passport. In other countries like Grenada, there's no residence requirement whatsoever. Different countries have different tax regimens. In some countries, you may have to be careful about whether you're subjecting yourself to both local and worldwide taxation. In other countries, you're at the very least not subjecting yourself to worldwide taxation. We talked about visa-free travel. Each passport gives you different entitlement to what countries you can travel visa-free to. What family members are included? That's a big difference. In some countries, each investment applies to a person. In some countries, one investment may give you and your spouse and your children and maybe even your parents a passport of that country. So you have to compare each country in that respect. And lastly, different countries do different levels of due diligence and security clearances. Some of them range from very, very intricate and detailed and sometimes lengthy security clearance procedures, and others are more cursory. So, Tammy, that kind of is the overview. Now let's get to why we're talking about Grenada.
Okay, after, a while back, Ron and I went to a global immigration conference in Geneva. And it kind of hit me then, like, why isn't everybody getting Grenada citizenship? Why is there's no reason why anyone can't get an E2 as long as they have a lawful source of funds and no security issue in their background. Because there's nothing disadvantageous about Grenada citizenship. For example, you get the passport, Warren's going to talk to you in detail about this, about the Grenada program, but Grenada, you actually can get a passport in as little as 4 months. Not so bad, right? Minimum investment. It can be a straight donation or a purchase of property, and Warren will discuss that. But even with a purchase of property, you could sell the property after a number of years and get your money back. So it's not a situation of an irrevocable commitment of funds. It can be a donation, like I said, a real estate investment. There is no residency requirement. You don't even have to be in Grenada to get it, which has its pluses and minuses. You only are taxed on the income you make in Grenada, which for most people won't be any. Obviously, there's visa-free travel. That's even more generous than having a U.S. passport, because U.S. we need Russian visas, we need Chinese visas. Grenada doesn't. The family members included in the Grenada passport it's very generous, because you can include, parents, you can include children up to 30 years old, Warren?
Yes.
Under 30, as long as they're dependent on you. And there is a pretty strict, I think in the Caribbean, the most strict vetting procedures, security-wise, and Warren will go into that more. But, having a Grenada passport is certainly not a mark on your character, a negative mark. If anything, you've been very thoroughly vetted to get that Grenada passport. So there are a lot of advantages to having that Grenada citizenship.
So we should mention that obviously neither Tammy nor I is involved in selling or representing the government of Grenada, but we do view this as a solution for a lot of our clients from places like India, Vietnam, and China. And before we agreed to promote this to our clients, we actually, Ambassador Neufeld hosted us in Grenada. And we had an opportunity to meet everyone from the Prime Minister to the head of the investment program on down to even the U.S. ambassador to Grenada, who was based in Barbados, to do our own due diligence as to whether we were comfortable with this program. And as well, speaking for myself, I walked away deciding I was comfortable suggesting this as an alternative to my clients. Let's spend a few minutes talking about, on the next slide, talking about some of the advantages of E2s for our investor clients from places like China, India, Vietnam. So, number one, it's a 5-year visa with unlimited extensions. So even if my client wants to do EB5, and it's going to be a 10-year wait or whatever, it's one E2 and then one extension, and they've covered the entire waiting period in the U.S. with their children going to school in the U.S. So it can be instead of EB5 or in addition to fill the gap in EB5. You can obtain the E2 visa, usually we know this, within a couple of months very often. Includes spouse and children under 21. Significantly for our Asian clients, the child can study, the E2 child can study in school, including public school in the U.S. Tammy, on the next slide.
On an E2 in most states, I can't talk about all states, but I know including Florida, the E2 until they're 21 gets in-state tuition. And, if you can push your kid, I tell my clients, make sure your kid is on the 3-year program, not the 5-year program, because after they're 21, they're going to have to change that or whatever. But it could be a cheaper way of sending your child to a state school. The E2 principal may choose not to even live in the United States, may not be taxed as a US resident, where the spouse makes no income might be. So you can pretty much avoid US taxation if somebody's not ready for US residence yet. And so that could be a big plus. Spouse can work. Well, that can be a big plus with when H4 lose work permission, which I think might be imminent. Not quite dual intent, but not dual intent. So I understand Elizabeth was telling me that the consul from Guangzhou was here yesterday, basically saying, well, we're not going to deny an F because, for example, a 526 has been filed. Well, for sure, you wouldn't deny an E then, because an E2 has a better dual intent standard than the F. Again, on if there's any immigrant visa petition you want to write consular process on it, please remember that, never default to adjustment. And lastly, if somebody isn't on the path to become a resident, I've had E2s in the United States until their late 90s. There's no reason, as long as the business is flourishing, for somebody not to have an E2 extended. And so it's a pretty good visa.
Yeah, a couple of other things, Tammy, that are very topical, certainly with respect to our Chinese clients. And we do a lot of Chinese EB5s. And traditionally, most of our Chinese clients are not particularly interested in coming to the US to manage a business in the US. But we know there's a lot more flexibility on the E2 than there is on, for example, the L1 EB1C in terms of developing and directing and hiring somebody else to manage the business, which is much more consistent with the interests of our Chinese clients. It's 2018. In the world of 2018, being able to apply for a long-term working visa without having to make an application to USCIS is actually very, very good. And the only option available to avoid USCIS is the E2. Again, in Asia, everybody's focused on quotas, EB5 quotas, and they're happy to hear there is no such thing as a quota on E2s. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the E2 investment can be used toward a direct EB5. You don't have to start all over again. If you made a $250,000 investment, you get your E2, you add another $250,000, and you may be able to do EB5. Now, on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about comparing the E2 versus the L1 EB1C. So what we're finding in China is that people are, EB5 is not realistic for a lot of people out there. So it's the Grenada E2 option versus the L1 EB1C option that people are considering. And we know now, of course, that EB1 is backlogged in China and India to 2012, which is its own set of issues. But Tammy, wouldn't you agree that the L1 EB1C, in terms of present USCIS adjudication policies, is problematic?
Okay, how many of you would rather do an L than an E2? Why?
Oh, no, I mean, like, just based off of comfort level. I've done more else.
Okay, because for me, if I could go shopping, if I had a choice between shopping at a consulate or embassy or shopping at CIS, I'd rather go to the consulate or embassy today than go to CIS. First of all, I haven't heard yet of the audits for too many approvals of E2s as opposed to audits of too many approvals of Ls, which is now happening at CIS. God forbid you're a generous officer or you happen to get too many good cases because your career is going to be jeopardized.
I don't know if people are aware of that, what's going on, maybe this one.
Well, somebody mentioned it last panel, but USCIS has started this process of auditing officers who have too many approvals and going through their cases, yes, and second guessing whether or not they should have been approved. And the officer who has too many approvals is going to be under scrutiny. And, obviously, if you're under scrutiny for too many approvals, what are you going to do to keep your job? You're going to deny. Now, I happen to represent mostly public companies, and I am getting a lot of pushback on my Ls for public companies. In fact, I've turned all my public companies into blanket Ls, which can be pretty hard to manage, at least the first 3 years on the blanket L, because everyone expires at the same time pretty much, and it's very hectic to extend those blankets. But nevertheless, to do a regular L now with CIS is like jumping into the lion's den. You're going to get a lot of pushback on those regular Ls. Elizabeth, yeah?
Have you looked at the CIS policy visas and all the SAC visas?
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry. Have you looked about the SAC visas, visas in the US?
Could you rephrase the question on the microphone?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any site visits on e-visas. Now, I have heard that, and this happens in Florida, where CBP will go into SunViz, look at the corporation and see if it's still active. That's not uncommon. And of course, our clients sometimes have very good corporations but fail to pay their annual corporate dues. And that could be a problem at the point of inspection, but that can happen on an L also. So, if I had a choice between a 1-year startup L or a 5-year E, I would pick the 5-year E any day, because the 1-year startup L, you're looking for that extension 9 months into the L, and immigration expects an unrealistic, pattern of growth and hiring of high-level employees that the company may not need yet in the U.S., and I find my smaller company Ls at the startup phase often bleeding money, hiring people that they don't need, just so they can possibly get that E extension, that L extension, maybe because they're not eligible for an E because they don't have the E nationality. 7-year maximum for an L, there's no maximum limit to the E. You can premium process the L, which is an advantage. Of course, you're going to get an RFE. So I don't know if that's more or less illusory, where the Grenada passport application will likely take, 6 to 8 weeks in any, consular embassy around the world. There's no specific investment amount for the E, which is good. But there's no investment required for the L. But the E, if you get the Grenada citizenship and the E investment, you're probably looking at a minimum of $300,000. Now, that might seem like a lot of money now when you can do an EB-5 for $550,000, but I promise you something, that period where we can be doing EB-5s for $550,000 is going to be short-lived. OMB published the regulatory agenda, and I don't exactly believe the government timeframes, but they have threatened to raise the EB-5 investment to $1.8 million, and virtually nothing will qualify as a TEA. And when you're looking at much higher EB-5 investments, the Grenada E2 seems a lot more appealing and may be affordable for people who won't be able to afford the EB-5 or who won't have to stand in line for EB-5. Active management, Ron mentioned, versus develop and direct. For somebody who doesn't want to be involved in the day-to-day management of a company, the E2 would be preferable. The E2 doesn't require any set number of employees, where try to get an L extended with no employees or with 2 or 3 employees who are maybe menial employees, you're not going to get that L extended, no way, no how. For the L, you need to have a period of overseas employment with the parent, subsidiary, or affiliate abroad, branch abroad. And for the L, you do have the eligibility for an EB-1C, but of course, and I know the Chinese are buying into this, and I just think it's wrong, because they're going to have to really grow that company in the U.S. exponentially to be able to do an EB-1C, and most of them don't understand that, this is what I always tell my clients, and I give this example because I have children. When my kid asks me for $5, I hand it to them. I don't even ask them what it's for, because it's fine, it's a small ask. That's a startup L, so to speak. When you go for the L extension, it's like your kid saying, Mom, can I have $100? Yeah, I'm gonna question them a little, but, they're getting 2 more years. Who cares? When you're asking for a green card, it's like when my kid comes to me and says, Mom, I want 5,000. And then I'm saying, okay, sit down, why? Because when your ask goes up, the scrutiny goes up. So, if for people who think that because they get an L, they're automatically sliding into base, a home run for the EB1C, you've got a long way to go. It doesn't translate. And somebody needs to tell Chinese nationals that just even if they get in the door with a startup L, it by no means guarantees them an extension or residence. And they're going to have to really build that US company and at the same time keep that foreign affiliate or branch or subsidiary going and growing in order to even be considered for residence. And lastly, if they set up the E2 properly, and it's conceivable if it's set up in a way that would qualify them for an EB1C, they can have their cake and eat it too, because if the US business grows large enough and the foreign business is still operational, the E can become an EB1C.
So, if we could scroll the slides ahead to the one that says hot E2 issues, and while we're doing that, Tammy, can I have $5?
I've given you, wait a minute. How much money have I given you for ask? You don't have Chinese money?
A rhetorical question, it didn't require an
That's
answer.
what I think you owe me about that.
Scratch that for the record, by the way. We do want to spend a few minutes talking to you about some, if we're going to be putting some of our Vietnamese and Indian and Chinese and Russian and Saudi and et cetera, Brazilian clients, and talking to them about Grenada E2, we should talk about some of what the hot issues are in E2 these days. So on this slide, you'll see some of them that we're focused on. Number one is source of funds. Now, source of funds for these E's is nowhere near as meticulous a process as on EB5, but you still need to deal with that. One of the issues we see on these types of cases very often is the gift. And on gift cases on E2, perfectly fine, but it should be a gift to the person who then has the money and can choose what to do with it, so that it becomes that person's investment. Not that on Tuesday I'm giving a gift so that you can get a green card. We want to say, no, it's a gift, do what you wish, and then I, the investor, choose to invest it in an E2 project. There's a tension around the world, and different councils are different on this. You have to do your homework. There's a concept of you only need to be actively in the process of investing. There's also a concept in the FAM that it has to be a real operating commercial enterprise. There's also a concept that the money has to be irrevocably committed. So how do you put all that together? If I'm going to start a new franchise or a new E2 business, and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to put all my money in escrow, irrevocably committed in escrow, but I'm certain I want to be able to get my money back if the E2 project doesn't go ahead, and I don't want to open the door of my business until I get the E2 visa. Is that okay? And the answer is, it depends on which consulate you're going to. Some will say that's okay, because you only have to be actively in the process of investing and your money's irrevocably committed. And some consul will say that's not okay, because on the date of application, you don't have yet a real operating commercial enterprise. If you're buying an existing business, it's easier to deal with. If it's a new business, it's always safer to have at least some of the money in the business and the doors open. Dual intent issues. Obviously, this comes up a lot in EB5. Tammy introduced the subject. But the key here is, if I'm considering doing a Grenada citizenship and then E2 application, and the person is already in the EB5 process, the first thing I want to do is see the 526. And did they check off that I'm going to apply for a green card in the US through adjustment, or did they say I'm going to process outside of the US? If they said I'm going to stay in the US and apply for adjustment, I've got a really problematic E2, because they can deny me based on the fact that I haven't credibly shown that I plan on leaving the U.S. before I ever apply for a green card, which is the FAM standard, right? It's somewhere between the H and L, which is complete dual intent, the B and the F, which is no dual intent. Here, it's okay, and I would say in 90% of my cases, it's okay to have an I-140 or a 526 pending, but I need to prepare the client for the interview to explain that they are definitely, positively going to be leaving the U.S. if they ever get an immigrant visa. And the last thing is, which we talked about already, so I won't go through it anymore, the concept of develop and direct, not requiring active management. So, on the next slide, let's go through, both Tammy and I have, in fact, been involved in a number of our clients who are in the process or completing the process of getting E2 visas based on having acquired Grenada citizenship.
Ron,
So, yes.
before you move to that, could you
Yeah.
just address Bulgaria, which recently, I think, enacted a citizenship by investment provision, but you're not actually
Yeah.
considering that
Yeah,
because
I did actually.
residency
Yeah,
before?
Diane asked me about the Bulgarian program, and I have studied this a little bit. I don't want to pretend I'm an expert on it in any way, but Bulgaria does have a citizenship by investment program that is likely to take more than a year to get the citizenship. So there's various stages involved in it. And so for most of my clients, when I'm discussing options of getting into the U.S. now, Bulgaria doesn't do that. So if somebody says, well, I'd like to be able to get an E2 visa in a year or two, well, then I may discuss Bulgaria. But that's more hypothetical in my practice. My clients want solutions now, and Bulgaria doesn't give them that. So I did look into that, yeah. Let's talk about some of the specific issues that we have seen for our, in my case, mostly Chinese clients who are going through the Grenada and then the E2 process. English language ability. This is an issue, right? If I do not speak any English, it's a perfectly legitimate question for the U.S. consul to say, how are you going to develop and direct the business if no one speaks Chinese? And so in every case, I have to make sure that my E2 project has some answer to that question. It may be that I have a son or daughter in the U.S. who's going to school and who's going to interpret for me. It may be that the E2 project is going to have somebody. I'm going to employ a bilingual person to run the company. I have to be able to answer that. Choice of consulate is extremely important. And there's 4 choices on these types of cases. Number one is, if it's a Chinese person, number one, the U.S. consulate in Guangzhou. I am aware of successful cases on Grenada E2s in Guangzhou. Most of my Chinese clients do not want to apply there. That's okay. Number 2, the U.S. consulate in Barbados has jurisdiction over Grenada. You can apply there. Number 3, if my client has a residence in Singapore or any other country, I can apply in Singapore. Number 4, various third country consuls around the world are very receptive to receiving these cases. There are a lot of consulates around the world who actually look forward to getting an interesting case because they don't deal with anything very interesting most of the time. And some consulates are very receptive, some want no part of this. So an important part of the lawyering is choosing the right consulate, discussing the various issues of the various consulates with your client. The fact that your client may have no U.S. business experience, well, that's relevant, right? Because the consul can say, well, how are you don't know the first thing about the U.S., how are you going to develop and direct successfully a business in the U.S.? And in preparing my client, yes doesn't answer to that. And it may be that, well, I'm going to hire somebody who does have U.S. business experience. Now, the answer may be different in each case. Nexus with Grenada. Now, what does this mean? This is a practical issue, not a legal issue. Our experience with the U.S. consulate in Barbados, Ambassador Newfield is going to talk about 2 ways to get citizenship in Grenada. One is the donation option, the other is buying property. When the client chooses to donate money to the government of Grenada and has never been to Grenada and has no residence in Grenada, we have seen problems at the US consulate in Barbados on the fact the client has no nexus to Grenada. You're not going to find that anywhere in the law or the FAM. I'm telling you practice, how it works. So what does that mean? It means if our client is going to choose the donation option in Grenada, we're going to suggest two things. Number one is he go to Grenada and be able to say, yeah, sure, I've been to Grenada. Number two, we're going to suggest that he have a lease for a period of time for a property in Grenada that will enable him to have a residence address in Grenada, which should establish this made-up nexus with Grenada requirement. Well, what if the client says, I want to speed things up, so while I'm getting my Grenada citizenship, I want to do my investment now, so the next day after I get my Grenada passport, I can apply for the E2. Well, you can certainly do all the prep work while you're getting Grenada citizenship, but you don't want to make your investment until you're a Grenada citizen. You don't want to be a Chinese person making an investment. At the time you're making an investment, you want to be a Grenadian person making an investment under the Grenada bilateral investment treaty.
Wait, I see some confused looks out there. And okay, and the reason why is this. If you make your investment as a Chinese national before you got Grenada citizenship, the mere fact that you become a citizen of Grenada doesn't change your investment to a Grenada investment because you were Chinese when you made that investment. So you have to get the qualifying citizenship first and make the investment afterwards. If you do it in reverse, it's not going to qualify for E2. Got it?
Yep.
Okay.
A couple other things quickly, Tammy, and then I'd like you to get into a little bit of the E2 and EB5 connection. So real quickly, we do see issues with multiple of our Chinese or Vietnamese clients who want to get E2s, want to get Grenada citizenship and E2s through the same business. Is that possible? And the answer is yes. But usually when we're going to do that, we're going to have one make most or all of the investment and be the E2 investor, and then the other preferably be the E2 manager. If they're each making 50% of the total investment and both trying to get in as an investor for a whole variety of reasons, they could both end up being denied. And then the last thing you see on the slide is issues specific to China. I've covered most of them. The one thing I at least want to mention is that there is a China, I'm not by any means advising on Chinese law, but my clients know in China that there may be issues of their ability to be dual citizens under Chinese law. I know that most of my clients are aware of that. The ones that are concerned about that don't go through this process. Many, say, yes, I know all about that, and that's fine. And they go through the process. The only thing I can,
my wife do it, and I won't.
which is done very often because only one of the spouses needs to be an E2, and then the other one can be a derivative E2 without that citizenship. So Tam, we want to leave plenty of time for Ambassador Newfield, but talk a little bit about comparing E2 and EB5.
Okay, well, most of you already know this, but E2 is a non-immigrant visa. EB5 leads to green card, permanent residence, and mandatory U.S. taxation. E2 can be obtained quickly. The processing time for a 526 now is between 25 and to 33 months. And I happen to think that unless the regional centers, and I hope you're listening to me, CMB and American Life and others, you all need to go to Congress and start to lobby for a realistic processing timeline. Because for it to take 25 months minimally to adjudicate these cases when for most of them only source of funds needs to be looked at is absolutely ridiculous. For an E2, your taxation depends upon, again, time spent in the US. EB5 is going to be mandatory taxation. EB5 has an exact amount of investment, which will likely go up, and you have to create 10 jobs. E2 doesn't. E2 is filed at the U.S. consulate, or it can be filed with USCIS. I prefer to file at the U.S. consulate or embassy. EB5 has to be filed with CIS. EB5 is available for all countries. E2 only for treaty countries. E2 requires at least 50% ownership by the treaty nationals. EB5 You don't even have to be an owner of the business. You can be a limited liability partner. E2 investment can be applied to direct EB5 investment. But if you're going to do that, you better know the rules of the game, because you cannot acquire a business from somebody else and have that money go to that third person and still qualify for a direct EB5. The money, the capital actually has to go into the business. Now, Ron, you want to deal
Well,
with?
maybe let's, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Warren.
Okay.
So why don't we now talk, give the floor to Ambassador Newfield, who will talk to us about the issues involved if our client chooses to get Grenada citizenship.
Thanks, Ron, thanks, Tammy. Appreciate having the opportunity to be here this morning and talk a little bit about Grenada. I'm just waiting for the slide deck to come up. So whilst they're coming up, I'll just really give you the rationale why the government of Grenada introduced CBI, Citizenship by Investment. As was mentioned, there's over numerous countries have it. Grenada introduced it really to get investment into the country, particularly for the real estate aspect of it. It's very, very hard for real estate developers to obtain any debt, so they really use the sale of citizenship by investment to complete the capital stack for real estate investment. And the government also uses the donation option to create revenue for the country, which obviously goes into numerous things, education, job creation, etc. So that was the rationale why it was created. A little bit about Grenada. The picture's taken on Granite's Beach, run by CNN as one of the top beaches in the world, looking across at the town of St. George's. For those of you who are not familiar with Grenada, just a few facts. It's a British Commonwealth country, stable democracy, two-party. Thank you. So I just want to simply get back to the right page. Really, part of British it's a Commonwealth, relatively small country, 100,000 people. English is the official language. As a location, it's south of the hurricane belt, so the people who are over the peninsula offshore, it's a great high-end Caribbean destination.
Sure.
The economy, what drives the Grenada economy? Three things primarily. Number one, St. George's University. It's home to the largest American accredited medical school. Interesting statistic, 1 in every 100 doctors in America is a graduate of St. George's University. It's got a very large veterinary school. 7,000 foreign students are based there, which shows full population. Let's say they make their presence known. You have agriculture as one of the other big parts, one of the biggest spice exports in the world, and lastly, tourism. So that's the core part of the economy. As part of the Eastern Caribbean Monetary Union, linked to the US dollar, so very stable currency. There are no taxation of foreign income. There's no need to report any foreign income. So only money earned in Grenada is taxable. The integrity of the passports. This was one of the biggest things that the Prime Minister looked at when the program was introduced. You will never ever find Grenada Prime Minister on road shows promoting it, unlike a number of other Caribbean destinations. His biggest thing is the due diligence. Our processing times are slightly longer than the other Caribbean jurisdictions. He's very, very careful who's coming into Grenada. One person doesn't make a decision on whether the vetting process works. It's approved by the cases recommended by the CBI unit, but then goes across to a full cabinet for a white house. So we wanted to make sure that there was integrity to the process. One of the most generous in terms of family members. Children, dependent children under the age of 30 are eligible, as well as parents and grandparents. So those are always the financial dependency. This tool currently in government are removing the financial dependency. What's also important is that future children are eligible for Grenada, as well as future spouses of the children. Recently, my son got married and his wife became Grenadian, and one of the other kids, the child recently and the granddaughter became Grenadian. So those went through. And that's not applied for through citizenship and investment, it actually applied for home affairs. Future spouses and grandkids.
Well, can I say something here? I mean, think about this though for a moment. If that family unit all becomes Grenada citizens, the 29-year-old son can apply for her own E2. The parents can apply for their own E2. You have such a big family unit riding on that grade of citizenship that you have potential E2s all over the place within that family unit. It's much more generous than the U.S. immigration system.
Thanks, Amy. For doing that. E2 I won't discuss more about, but as you pointed out, we're the only country in the world that has a citizenship by investment program that has no residency requirements and E2 visa treaty. And lastly, successful applicants can obtain a graded residency card, which we found particularly in China is a very appealing option for clients. You switch it manually there, please.
That's back here.
Yeah, it's an echo equation, sorry.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Not too many, sorry. Right. So relatively fast process. It's running about 120 days at the moment. I mentioned briefly earlier the visa-free travel, so I won't repeat that. There is no interview required, there's no visit required, and no residency required. On the real estate option, it has one of the shortest hold periods, and it is eligible to resell the investment after a few-year period. We'll get this right, Jeff.
We're getting pretty
There
pictures.
we go. So as I said, there are two options. One is a donation to the transformation fund, very straightforward process. The other one is real estate purchase. There are a few projects which I'll go through that one can choose from, that's in the national basically works. Vetting and security clearances. It's really a multi-stage process that they run through. It's looked at from one is called commercial due diligence. Educational, the person said their schools they're going to, the university they're going to, that is verified. The businesses, lawsuits, etc. are verified. The next thing is a criminal background checks through Interpol and other agencies. And lastly, security due diligence, various terrorist watch lists, etc. So it's quite a comprehensive process. And that's normally the longest part of the clearing of clients. Depending on what part of the world, it really does not exclude citizens from any country. But obviously, in certain countries, the background security clearances take a lot longer than others. I'm sorry, I have the slide deck in front of me here. Basically, the source of funds is an issue, but it's far less than anything you'd be familiar with from the US. One thing they do look for, and rejections are normally based on basically incorrect information being submitted or incomplete information being submitted. In terms of criminal background checks, smaller offences like a DUI tend to ignore those. Usually they're looking for more serious criminal things. Person called the marijuana at 18 years old, the person's 30 years old, applying. You can do any real jail time. Those kind of things that will overlook. They're actually very reasonable to work with the team in terms of that. One thing they also look for a person who looks into 3, 4, 5 citizenships, why. So I think ones that can be justified and explained, that is one of the red flags. I'm very important. IMF has ranked Grenada CPI program as the gold standard. As I previously stressed, the integrity of the passport is the biggest single thing. How it works is there's two types of agents. One wants to apply to wants to become a Canadian citizen. So firstly, you work with one of the international marketing agents. One goes to the website, they're clearly listed over there. Or one of the property developers will have their own marketing agent license. The client will also need to work with a local agent. A local agent in Grenada is a Grenadian lawyer. It's been approved. Not all lawyers are local agents, but all local agents are lawyers. And there's certain of them that are much more efficient than others, in my experience. So, and normally the marketing agents will already have relationships, so they'll take care of that relationship. And that's how they'll be managed. As mentioned, the PR card is an option that's available for an extra $1,000 a year. And very important though, for it to have a Grenadian address, the client does need to either rent on a long-term lease or own property in Grenada. So when one goes looking at a Section 11, which is the real estate option, what you always consider, is it a share purchase or is it actually a title deed and transaction? Just some of the approved projects that are currently underway in Grenada, right through the country. They have them. I'm just going to quickly whip through 3 of them. Okay, we'll try. We have a technical problem here. Maybe you're more successful than I am. You'll try to to the next slide. Just press the next one. I'm just going to cover off 3 of these. I think this one's going to be in trouble. Okay, let's drop over one there. We lost that slide there. Okay. Okay, basically it's just a sampling of the 3 projects that were approved there. For full disclosure, I wear 2 hats here. I'm Ambassador of the Consul General based in the Ambassador of the Consul General, which I do for the grand total of $1 a year. I'm also one of the largest real estate developers in the country. So one of the projects
will give you 5
the Kimpton Moana Bay, which is an IHG hotel, and so for full disclosure, I just wanted to mention that. So it's from the rest there.
I'm going to take over, so
do that at this point. Okay. I'll just run through the 3 real estate projects that I have started there. Next one. Next one, please. Basically, yeah, so, I'll be around afterwards if anybody has any specific questions about the program. It's a relatively new program. Application volumes are increasing. The score was still close to Ron and Tammy's effort, and otherwise, messages getting out there. I was updated in Beijing yesterday, and clearly the people are picking up on Grenada, and so we're actively working as a government to increase our efficiency and processing times and so on. So thanks everybody for the time this morning.
we want to give you about 5 more minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes for questions, great.
Yes, let's try to use the microphone so people that are listening in remotely can hear us.
Just restate the question.
You're planning this option as an alternative to EB5. What do you feel is the possibility the government of the United States will say, hey, this is like a scam, so to speak, and you're using this just to get around these regulations, and they're going to shut this down too, or could be a viable.
Well, this isn't just a way to get around EB5. It's a way for people for countries where they don't have an E2. For me, I'm in Miami. I'm dealing with Venezuelans. I'm dealing with Bolivians. I'm dealing with Brazilians. None of them have E2 treaties. And with EB5 amount of investment going up and with the processing time getting longer and the situation in some of these countries becoming dire, the E2 visa is a very nice option. And if you play this out, let's just say, somebody chooses even the land acquisition at $400,000. You can bring in your parents, you can bring in your kids who are 27 and 28. You're opening up the E2 visa option for maybe 4 or 5 different family units. So you get a lot of bang for your buck there. But like I was telling somebody earlier, I had an Israeli get an E2 from the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. He got the Georgian passport 2 weeks before because his grandfather was born in Georgia. I've had so many Jewish people obtain Spanish passports because their great-great-great-great-grandfather was a Sephardic Jew from Spain. I mean, why is that different? They've got no ties to Spain, maybe have never been in Spain. There's no requirement that you have a nexus to a country where you have a nationality. Now, if that gets written in the Foreign Affairs Manual, it's going to kill more than Grenada. It's going to kill all those other countries, all those other situations where people just, acquire a passport through some type of accident of birth of a grandfather or a grandmother or whatever.
Yeah, this is not, folks, a scam. I mean, I've been doing immigration law for well over 30 years, and I remember going to a visa office liaison meeting more than 30 years ago, where they said if the U.S. government does not inquire into how someone obtained a passport, that's not our issue. So if someone comes to us with a U.S. passport from a third country, we just look at the E2. This is 30-some years ago. The fact that, Grenada, this is not a brand new treaty. There's nothing new about this. It just is an option now that we've worked on how to solve the problem of our EB-5 clients, but it doesn't even have to be related to that. So A, it's not a scam. B, this has long existed, and I think that's very important. I just want to say one other thing, by the way, real quickly. If anybody's interested in the concept of citizenship by investment generally, there is an organization that I'm very involved in called the Investment Migration Council, based in Geneva, Switzerland. They do an annual forum in June in Geneva. I can give you more information on that if you want. Next question.
You mentioned something about using the E2 investment toward the EB-5 investment. What are some of the challenges that come up, just to feel that using specifically the investment that you use for the E2 investments?
It would always be a direct investment. So obviously, if you want to take advantage of the TEA option, you would want to make sure that E2 investment is in a TEA. The other thing is you can't buy a business. You have to invest in a brand new commercial enterprise, or you have to equitize a current investment, because if the money doesn't go into the business but goes to the seller, it won't qualify for E2. The other thing is that, sometimes it won't qualify for EB-5. A lot of times E2s turn into EB-5 over generations, so to speak. So you have to make sure that your investor is taking money out, getting taxed on it before she's putting it back in. To qualify for EB-5, because if it's just retained earnings, it's not going to qualify. I mean, we do whole conferences on, E2 to EB-5, and it's a fairly complicated area, but those are some of the areas you want to look at, and obviously you need the 10 qualifying employees.
Yeah, there's a couple other things I want to add to Tammy's very good analysis, because we do get involved in this a lot. One is if somebody's on E2 today, and maybe he's going to add to his investment in 5 years and do an EB-5. Remember, EB-5 requires very meticulous documentation of source of funds, which means if there's any possibility that my E2 is going to be an EB-5, I want to go way beyond the bounds of the E2 source of funds documentation to have that available. Another issue we get involved in a lot on E2s to EB-5 is, well, what I do an E2, I make a $200,000 investment, and I now have 8 employees. And now I'm going to add $300,000 to the EB-5 and just add maybe 1 employee or 2 employees, whatever. Are there any issues with let's say I already have 10 employees, but I'm 200,000 short. Can I make a 200,000 investment today to reach the 500,000, but that 200,000 didn't add any employees? In my opinion, that's fine, but that's an issue we deal with.
I just wanted to address that question from before, and I want to echo what Ron Tang said. It doesn't, I think that somewhere along the line, some consular officer is going to try to write a memo back to the State Department saying, this is a scam. I just think about the fact that when I moved to Hong Kong in '87, a lot of people wanted alternative passports, and I have been involved in alternative citizenship since '87 to now, 30 years. And whenever I have people that own companies that are listed on NASDAQ, they want to have flexibility for visa-free travel. And the US consulate in Hong Kong at that time, depending on who the consular section chief is, they will raise issues. And Casey and I have been living in this part of the world. A lot of Hong Kong Chinese get Taiwan passport. There's a treaty, as you all know, between Taiwan and the United States. And when Hong Kong people get a Taiwan passport, consular officers say, well, that's not a real Taiwan passport. You're really a resident of Hong Kong. The UK treaty doesn't cover the British Crown colony of Hong Kong at that time. So I am more concerned, really, when there's a high volume of PRC Chinese. I can see someone in Beijing or Chengdu or one of these cities, some consular officer, just like in the early days of EP5, they don't like the program, they don't like these Chinese or Canadian passports, they could say that, hey, that's a violation of Chinese law for you to have dual nationality. So my suggestion is that if you guys are going to do this kind of stuff, don't go to the consulates in China to apply. I don't like Barbados because I think this business about this nexus to Grenada is ridiculous. But you know, we've all been practicing this for 30, 40 years. That's why I don't do EB5s anymore. The nightmares of 1998 are still haunting me. I still have kind of stuck in that. And that's associations of this, but I love Grenada. I put people there, no worldwide tax, everything that Tammy and Ron says, this has my full endorsement. It's one of the best passport programs.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent analysis. Folks, we're lawyers, all right? There are all sorts of problems in everything we're doing now. Many are brand new, created by the Immigration Service out of whole cloth. How many of you have heard of Walsh and Pollard? All right, Walsh and Pollard was a case, it was our case, where on a $15,000 investment, we brought in 900 people to the US. The Immigration Service said, this is fraud, this is a scam. The bottom line is I'm a lawyer. I took it to court, we won. Walsh and Pollard is written into the Foreign Affairs Manual. $15,000 investment can be substantial. The point is, yeah, any stuff we're doing to try to come up with creative solutions to the many problems that are out there may be challenged by the government. That's just the beginning, that's not the end. As lawyers, we're going to fight back, and if we're right under the law, ultimately we should win.
Yeah, the other thing I just want to end this with is, you know, I've been practicing 35 years. I know you guys are all looking and saying I'm not 35 yet.
You're improving with age, like my wife.
5 years of that was as a prosecutor with the US government. I've never seen things so bad within the agency as they are now. And it's gonna take, this is not gonna go away in my years of practice. This empowerment to deny is going to last for the next decade, likely for the rest of my practice years. So anything that we can think of outside the box to provide alternatives for our clients is a viable option right now, because the front door is shutting. Now you have to look at climbing through the upstairs window, and as long as there's a legitimate alternative, you've got to look at that, because it's certainly getting much more difficult to deal with USCIS.
Thank you for your attention.